Hello and welcome back to the podcast on the Diplomacy Next YouTube channel. This podcast is powered by the Study Box Tuition Center, tuitions at your doorsteps. We are here because we want to revolutionize the education system of our town, that's Kuffad, and maybe we'll get a chance to to provide our services to people across the districts and somewhere else, especially in the other parts of the country. As of now, it's a new startup that we are actually getting quite positive for feedback, and I hope that all the viewers would love to have a look at our initiative when it comes to tuitioning. Apart from that, I hope that everyone is just keeping good and healthy. Uh, Thanks a lot. Thanking every single person who watches our videos, who watches our programs and our podcasts, and always gets the thumbs up notification that there is a video that has arrived. So this video I have actually decided to talk about a very important issue of Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover, and analysts call it the fall of Kabul back 2 years, and then whatever has transpired, we'll be talking at length about all of the issues. And I'm being joined by a very lovely guest, Sabika, owais, and she's from Amity, quite promising and a young student. Uh, has accepted my invitation on a very short note, so I'd like to thank her and welcome her on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm really glad to be here. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to start by talking about since we're talking about the fall of Kabul, I would first like to talk about the geopolitics of Afghanistan as such. So we know that Afghanistan as such has a very strategic location, and the reason being because it's in the center of South Asia, and it is basically bordering with like multiple countries, like for example Russia, it is Pakistan, it is India. So it is like the only country which basically allows open border access to like all the countries like Russia, Pakistan, India, China, NATO allies, United Kingdoms. So one of the reasons that is why it is such a, I would say it is like the epicenter for a power struggle. So Afghanistan has become a epicenter for power struggle, and during even when the war between the United Kingdoms and uh, basically the Soviets was there, Afghanistan acted as a buffer state. So it has a very important strategic location as such. And I would say that India, as such, also has had its strong interest in Afghanistan. It started to build a Chabra port in Iran via Afghanistan so that it could basically have an easier access to Central Asia. Now, that was important for India because they could not have direct access to Central Asia because of its like rival neighboring countries like China and Pakistan, of course. So that is why Afghanistan has been an extremely neighboring country for India as well. And you can say that, yeah. So basically, it is extremely like Afghanistan has like a very strategic importance to all the neighboring countries around. And now let's talk about the fall of Kabul as such, like what happened on 5th August of 2021. So the war that was waged 20 years ago, which caused so much of loss of life, around 70,000 people have been killed because of that. And all of them, all the 70,000 have been civilians. Um, it has been extremely, tragic, I'd say. Let me just state some facts for you. Um, yeah. So basically, for the USA lost around like 2,325 of its army personnel, and they spent 2.226 trillion dollars on the war in Afghanistan, and it was considered as like a blitzkrieg because for 20 years you're waging such an infamous war, and you're constantly the US and the NATO allies are like claiming that they're going to build a nation over there. And yet, after 20 years, we saw that there was no outcome of the nation building that was being claimed so. Um, so yeah, and after the the Trump administration as such signed a very flawed deal with the Taliban, and when they decided to pull their troops out. So when they decided to pull the troops out, they forgot that basically USA basically forgot about Afghan people who they basically came 20 years ago to protect. And so it basically, I'd say it was basically a failed military planning, and it was a humiliation. It was a humiliation to the USA because of how basically it failed to protect those it sworn to protect. Um, so I think America's creation of a highly centralized state, and basically how it vested a lot of power in Kabul, and its constant, the bombing campaigns that happened in Afghanistan, which we have seen that caused so much of loss of life. So many people went into like poverty. There was famine there. Little children were malnourished, and yet the outcome was nothing. So 20 years of war for nothing, and Afghan people were left to fetch for themselves once they decided to basically pull out their troops, which was quite an impulsive decision on the Biden administration as well. So they basically just focused on evacuating the nationals rather than those who they fought alongside in these 20 years, which basically has damaged America's character. All the presidents of the USA since 2001 have contributed to the failure and misery of Afghanistan, including President Trump and President Biden, who, like President Trump, first signed a very flawed agreement, and then President Biden went ahead with this flawed, this decision that was made by the Trump administration and impulsively pulled out all of the troops. So, and Afghanistan, I would like to mention that it was dependent on USA for all of its air support, medical support, and logistics like wages and food. So basically, you left them to fetch for themselves. You left with them nothing. And we know that President Abdul Ghani also fled the country, and leaving the Afghan people in despair. Now, 3 years later, we can see that there has been a replacement of Ministry of Women's Affairs with the Ministry of Vice and Virtue, which is under the control of Taliban, and has now formed new rules for the women over there. And it basically claims, Taliban as such claims that Islam has given women the right to study, but the issue that lies with them is how the system of education is working. So they want to segregate on the basis of the gender. And apparently women over there are allowed to study till 6th grade, but not afterwards. And their interpretation of basically Islam that they have by themselves, they are basically forming new and stricter rules every other day for women over there. So schools are shut basically from grades 7 to 12, and around 850,000 girls have lost an education, have lost an formal education from the past 3 years. And more than half of the population is basically starving in Afghanistan. And then Taliban basically blames USA for it. They see that because they have frozen their assets as such, their population is in despair. Now, I'd say this is extremely tragic. And to come back to it, to this issue, United Nations has such just give me a second, I'll just go through the facts. So so United Nations has such said that it is basically nearly impossible for the international community to recognize Taliban as a government, because as long as it is restraining half of its population, which is obviously women, from studying and doing jobs, so there is not going to be peace. So Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan is not yet officially recognized by any foreign or international organization since its seizing of power in 2021. And despite the promise that Taliban made that they're going to have a more moderate rule than what they had in 1996 to 2001, they have since started to enforce more restrictions on women and girls. So including like barring women from most jobs and public places. And it's like basic public places, like, you'd say gyms, you'd say parks. You cannot travel alone. You cannot travel alone without a male relative. And so they have basically brought back their interpretation of Islam over the new forming of rules for women. And they have also brought back the 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 infamous practice of public executions. So these decrees are highly unpopular among these Afghan population, and this basically is affecting Taliban both internally and internationally. So um, it has been inflicting suffering on half of their population and damaging their economy. And Taliban remains autocratic, with an unaccountable central government, with mostly male members holding positions of power in the government. So I'd say this this situation that has been caused in Afghanistan is this can also be because of what USA promised, and yet it did not deliver. So um, in 2017, basically USA relaxed its engagements for airstriking, which basically resulted in dramatic increase in civilian casualties. And the CIA armed Afghan militia group were seriously responsible for serious human damage and like human rights abuses, which included extrajudicial killings. So it inflicted invisible wounds. It also, like, two-thirds of the Afghan population is said to be suffering from mental health problems. So about more than 70,000 people have also been killed. And yet we do not see any hope for this country. We do not see any political developments or any economic development as of now. Um, it's a it's an utter despair, I'd say. The land is an utter despair. Um, that's something that I
If
wanted
if
to.
if I get whatever you have been saying is that all the information and all the statistics, putting them in the perspective, I reckon there are three things that we have to look into before we try to understand what this entire fall of Kabul means for the policy discourse of the countries that actually inhabit this region. When USA left the Afghanistan and Taliban took over as the rulers of the country, that country which was devastated economically, where there were warlords, there was issues of women rights, there were issues of minorities from other religious denominations, and that's one part of it. Second thing is that Taliban's assets were frozen, for they were kept collateral for the development and for the improvement, if any. Even Afghanistan's new regime or Taliban's takeover, even they gave them the assurance that things will be always improving in Afghanistan after Taliban took over. And the third thing is that down the line, US withdrawal from the Afghanistan did have a meaning for the security architecture of the region of South Asia, especially. When you say that it has a very important geostrategic location in the region. After the fall of Kabul and the Taliban takeover, if we can try to understand what has happened to the security dynamics, and you have told in your first introductory part that there are many actors that are involved, be that regional actors, be that global actors. Countries like Russia, China, they have been trying to maneuver hard to get their interests secured in the country like Afghanistan. I would like to understand more broadly about first the rights of women, if we specifically go by this thing. What happened to that? What happened? You said that there was the ministry was renamed as something like
Vice and virtue.
vice and virtue, whatever it is.
Yes.
What happened? What's the current state of women rights in Afghanistan? Although
Yeah.
we'll be talking about what Tilak Devesar in his book Pashtuns, The Forgotten Legacy, there are certain things that we have to keep in mind if we have to understand Afghanistan from the cultural perspective or from the political perspective. US didn't fall that line. US didn't understand how to rule Afghanistan. To be frank enough and to be quite candid about it, US failed to they left behind a huge pool of arms, and that are even, that nobody knows where they went. Are they with the actors of the state? Are they with the non-state actors? What are its implications for the country? We'll talk that in the later part. First, let's talk about this women rights and rights of the minorities in Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul.
Right. So, coming to that, I would like to mention that since when we go back to Taliban 1.0, which was in 1996, we know that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia were the only two countries which recognized that regime. Now, during that time as well, Taliban was extremely strict. Strict in terms, they have their own interpretations of Islamic law. I wouldn't say it matches the cultural perspective of Afghanistan, because when we go back to the time when even Russia had control of Afghanistan, or even before that, when maybe for only a certain period of time, when political situation used to be quite, I would say, stable just for a little while, women's rights were not such a very big issue like what they are currently under the Taliban regime as such. So replacement of I would start by saying that replacement of Ministry of Women's Affairs, which was obviously it's like a ministry. Taliban decided to basically change its name to Ministry of Vice and Virtue, and which basically this new Ministry of Vice and Virtue basically forms new rules and harsher rules for women. So these they have their own interpretations according to them of how women should behave, how women should travel, how women should work, how women should study. So they, even though promising that situations will get better and they will figure out something that they would allow women to study, currently we can see that that around 850,000 women have lost on formal education since they have taken control, and only girls till sixth grade are allowed to study over there. So what after that? Now we know that there are certain NGOs over there, private NGOs, which do help certain amount of women over there to study, to have this basic education, but yet it is not enough. It is obviously not enough. They have a government which is basically completely controlled by, represented by only men. I'm so sorry, there is, I guess, a loss of.
Okay.
Yeah. So getting back to it, so basically this has caused immense, like more than half of the population is suffering over there. Taliban constantly keeps on claiming that it is gonna, better the conditions of women over there. But yet we see that like just last year, there was this instance where Taliban banned in April they banned women working in United Nations. Now, never has in the history of United Nations has such a thing happened that women are the workers of United Nations, especially representing from Afghanistan, are being told that they cannot work. This will cause an extreme. This is basically politically. I don't think it's politically as well not right for them internally, and obviously it puts them in a very bad character, and it puts them in a very bad light, and it is going to become nearly impossible for them to get any recognition by any international platforms or by any country, because as long as there are restrictions over women, there is not going to be peace over there. So that's something that I want to talk about.
And if we talk about what happened to the security architecture that USA left in absolute tatters, if
Yes.
we talk about what has happened to the security of the country, I mean, is it quite that what normally Western analysts would comprehend as a country run by warlords, or a country run by a democratic way? Even if USA discovered a democratic template for the country like Afghanistan to be run by even by Taliban, what happened to that?
Now we know that 20 years ago, when Bush waged the war on terrorism, Washington Post as such had stated that that Taliban was ready to give Osama bin Laden after the September 11 attacks. Yet, the main cause, the main reason why USA invaded Afghanistan was because they wanted to completely remove Taliban from Afghanistan. That is what the claim goes as so. And so basically, because of that, they spent $2.26 trillion on the war in Afghanistan, which caused a lot of basically a lot of harm to the people of Afghanistan. Now, I would like to mention, despite the fact that USA centralized their power in Kabul, they forgot that there are many other rural areas as such where where Taliban was gaining a lot of popularity because of the massive bombing campaigns that USA started. People, the rural people of Afghanistan started to uh, give it support to Taliban, and Taliban started to gain more popularity over there. And yet, and yet then in the end, when they claimed for 20 years that they have started a nation building program after their one agenda got completed, which was basically in 2011 when President Obama announced that a threat to the world has been destroyed, which was Osama bin Laden as such. After that as well, we did not see that the troops were being taken away, or that they were they were starting a little bit of democratic procedures over there, and elections were being held. But yet a lot of atrocities which was also caused by the American military as such cannot be justified. So, and then Afghanistan was also dependent on USA for all of its support, for all of its medical support, all of its logistics, including basic food. So uh, for 20 years, a failed agenda, a failed agenda of nation building, a failed agenda of counterterrorism, when in the end they basically left the Afghan population to fetch for themselves when President Trump basically signed a very flawed agreement with Taliban, a very flawed agreement, and which President Biden continued with, because his impulsive decision to basically basically retrieve all of its troops so suddenly was 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 not right for the land of Afghanistan. Um, yes, so that's
Uh,
that's
if
my
if if we talk about the implications of U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, uh, why do you see the regional implications of that sudden or unplanned withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan? Where is the country headed to? I mean, do you make any of the interpretations or whatever we say? What do you make of Afghanistan as of now as a country in SARC group? Is there any glimmer of hope that we'll be obviously looking at, or we have to just let things settle first? It has been 2 years altogether now. Uh, there may be certain things that even people in the Afghanistan may celebrate about the takeover of Taliban. There is a certain constituency that celebrated it. But there are security implications. Where do you see the country headed to? Is it making inroads into the regional integration, or we have to just wait? It's yet prematurely if we can conclude that.
I think for now there is no hope for my interpretation. I'd say there is no hope because you can see that the population is suffering over there. 58% of the population is living in poverty over there right now. People do not have basic amenities because they were dependent on the USA as such for all of the amenities. Um, Military support, air support, basic things like logistics, food, everything. They were dependent on USA for that. And as such, the current regime over there, Taliban, I don't think that they have any means yet, or any structural plan, any strategy yet to build a nation, to build something for the Afghan people. So basically, they are in despair, and moreover, more than half of the population, like the women over there, are suffering constantly. Education is completely gone. Women cannot work over there. women cannot even travel there anymore by themselves. So I think that is not, obviously that is not development. Rather than focusing on development, they are focusing on more their interpretations of Islamic law, their interpretations of laws on women, rules on women, stricter rules on women. So I think because of that, because of this, it has become nearly impossible for any country to recognize them. Uh, so yeah, that is my interpretation as such.
And one more thing, that's the important part of this podcast is India is seen by the Afghans as a country that has earned a lot of goodwill over there by its work in infrastructure building, in education, in railways, and in the public discourse. Taliban's, not Taliban's, I mean Afghans as such, look at India as a country that has helped even during the US presence there, a country to develop. India has earned that goodwill. I mean, why do you see India contributing to the development of Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul?
Uh, After the fall of Kabul, for now, see, when USA had its presence over there, India had a very close ties with Afghanistan. Major reason being because it wanted to basically have its presence in the Central Asia. Now, India could not have a direct, basically a direct, basically a direct contact with Central Asia because of its rivaling neighbors such as China and Pakistan. So they India basically invested billions of dollars in Afghanistan, be it on their parliament building, be it on the Chabbar port, which was basically being built in Iran. So it was being built in Iran so that there would be a direct contact between Iran and Afghanistan and India. So that would have been easy. So for trade, it would have been easier, and for an easier access to Central Asia, it would have been easier as well, which was strategically extremely important for India. And now that the land of Afghanistan is in complete ruckus, I don't think that India yet will basically has much plans like it did previously, like it invested previously. So